Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. It's a slightly embarrassing introduction, but hopefully I can disappoint you appropriately in the next 20 or so minutes. So first of all, a small ask: if you are just like 50% uncomfortable of putting your camera on, if you just kind of don't care either way, I would love for you to put your camera on so I can see more faces, and I'll try to talk into my camera so you can also feel like I can see you, and look at my slides every once in a while. But if you, I mean, obviously if you don't want to, no problem, but if you kind of don't care either way, that's this is something I've been thinking about for the last about a year and a half, which is a paper in progress, and I've presented this idea in different versions over the last year or so, and hopefully I can keep it a little bit shorter today so I can hear your thoughts and perspectives. I'm going to skip the whole first like 15 minutes of this talk, which was about research through design, because just from looking at the program, and I'm sorry that I missed this, but I think Anastasia Ostrovsky did some pretty good work of probably introducing research through designs, and also this audience is very familiar with this. My lab, just as a brief introduction, with the Human Robot Companionship and Collaboration Companionship Lab at Cornell. Our work spans sort of like almost like pure AI work for robotics, to empirical studies of how humans interact with robots and AI, to robot design. I kind of accidentally got into robot design. I've never had a very strong theoretical education, and I feel like I'm really enjoying for the last decade or so to learn more about design theory and design thinking. I just got a new textbook that arrived in the mail yesterday. So I really find that I took 1 year of design school, but it was very trade school-like. So it was a lot of just drawing circles and you know, getting really good at that, and then drawing lines and getting good at that. So so really only since I accidentally stumbled into design of HRI, I'm starting to also appreciate the deep underlying theory. But I would say many of the robots that, can you see my slides? I'm going to use this like this format because it's going to be slightly spoilery, but easier for me to navigate. A lot of the robots that I worked on were kind of rebellions against the state of the art at the time. Whether it was thinking about everyday objects as robots, to having sort of a huge musical instrument being extended to an expressive head, to making a robot that's not robust but actually fragile, or designing a robot that was kind of emphasized its role as a tool rather than a companion. And kind of in the late first decade, like late 2010s, I feel like a lot of these design ideas that I was exploring were adopted in the general marketplace. And if you look at these kinds of robots that came out of different companies, they had a lot of these features of being sort of like small, low degree of freedom. And on some level, you know, I could be very happy that, you know, the area that I worked in accidentally became kind of very mainstream. On the other hand, I also kept feeling increasingly, also through the studies that we did, that there was something really uncomfortable about this whole idea of the social robot companion. And the more time passed, in some way I was invested in it, you know, professionally. On the other hand, also it was kind of creeping me out. We did a study where people were disclosing intimate, you know, negative experiences to a robot, and the study was very successful. And actually the robot could make people, you know, disclose more and feel more comfortable, feel better about themselves after they talk to the robot. And even though this was an academic success, I felt like there was something not quite great about this. These robots are often being sort of sold as members of the family, and, you know, I think family is more sacred than that, than adding a robot to it. And I'm not the only one, you know, this is just off Twitter from 2 months ago, for a new robot, you know, companion, and somebody's like, is this real? Like, oh no. And when we interviewed, you know, people about robotic companions. In this case, we interviewed independently living older adults. Mostly they felt like this whole idea of having a robot companion is a little bit inappropriate. And this brought me to trying, and over the last year or so, and this is a talk that sort of explores this, understand what is it about this, I call it the social uncanny. It's not this uncanny valley of the robot looking creepy, but it's just like uncanny feeling about the social role of robotic companions. This was happened through, actually in reality, throughout the design of another robot that I'm going to get to in the end. When somebody sent me a paper unrelated to robotics at all, it was about IKEA and why IKEA is becoming less, is giving way to the craft movement. And I started thinking about this idea of what is it about objects that are mass-produced and their role in our lives. And I ended up going back, kind of this like reference rabbit hole where you read something, then you kind of have to read the other paper because the author just said it's the most important paper, and then that paper cites another paper. And I got all the way back to 1906, kind of exploring this. And I'm calling this a social uncanny. Obviously, it's like a good, clever marketing trick, and it's supposed to relate to the Uncanny Valley that most of you are familiar with. Can you just, like, how many people know the phrase the Uncanny Valley in this audience? Great, so nearly everybody. How many people think it's related to Freud and a paper of his? No, the Freud connection is not like as well known. Okay, so I'm like going one step further. So people are talking about how Freud is sort of introduced this idea of the uncanny in 1919, but I'm going to do one over and say Freud actually is not the original proponent, but the paper by Ernst Jentsch in 1906 is the earliest that I could find about this idea of the psychology of the uncanny. And a lot of the things that people think about the uncanny. So again, another question. How many people think the uncanny valley has to do with whether we are not sure if something is alive or dead, and that's kind of this doubt is something that makes us uncomfortable? Is that a well-known thing? Yeah, like a few. So a lot of roboticists that I've talked to and have this notion that we're not really sure about why something can. There was this paper by Mori that was translated in 2012 again, where the word uncanny valley comes from, the theory comes from. It has to do with this like prosthetic hand, and it moves, but it's not really alive. It's detached from the body. And Mori says, the fact that we can't be really sure if something is alive or dead makes us feel uncomfortable. And this actually comes from Ernst Jentsch, who wrote in 1906 that this idea of the uncanny, this idea of what I think the most useful translation to English is creepiness, to modern English, this unheimlich in German, comes from this idea of these psychical uncertainties. We're not really sure if something is animate or not animate. And actually Jentsch talked specifically about automatic figures. He talked about this automata as being the like ultimate uncanny. So it's not, we didn't discover this with robots. He actually was thinking about these automata that were like a fashionable item in the late 19th century. And he said, this feeling of like not being quite sure of what's going on with this, like not really alive, not really dead, is uncanny. And when Freud wrote about 13 years later, wrote in 1919, and I always want to tell people, when you look at these years, you have to remember that 1914 to 1918, the world was, changed completely. For 4 years, the world destructed itself and like had to reimagine itself with World War I. So Freud now writes after World War I, after technology basically proved that it can wipe out humanity if we just, go far enough. He comes back and says, let's go back to this idea of the uncanny, of this idea of like being creeped out by something. And he says, Jentsch has this idea of not being sure if a machine is alive, but that's not really what makes these machines uncanny. He says the real uncanny does not come from our uncertainty, but it comes from our memory of repetition. And I kind of like have goosebumps even now, because every time I think about this, it's kind of uncanny. But this idea of, you know, when you walk somewhere and you're again in the same place. Have you seen the Blair Witch Project? How many have watched that? You know, they walk in the woods and then suddenly they're in the same place again. That's uncanny, right? You meet somebody, you walk out of the store and the same person's outside. Or if you've seen David Lynch's, what was it, Lost Highway or U-Turn, when somebody calls him from home, but it's the same person they're actually talking to at that point. So Freud says uncanny is about like looping back on something. It's about this idea of returning to something that's been familiar. Twin Peaks, The Return, you know, the key from the original series appears again. And this is actually a trope that appears a lot, you know, even more than just the manufactured creature. It's this idea that you meet your younger self. Gemini Man, some genetic engineering creates a copy of Will Smith, I think. Paul Ritter here, I'm going to quote from the trailer of this. Where is Paul Ritter? Undergoes a mysterious treatment only to discover it's been replaced by a better version of himself. So Freud, in his analysis of this uncanniness of the doppelganger, he calls this in German, this like double twin copy of something, has to do, when he looks at sort of the mysticism or the myths around these like doubles, he says that the story is always the same. You're trying to use technology to create some better version of yourself. And then this thing comes back and kills you. That's the story. That's like the myth that comes back over and over and over again. And he says, you know, what does this represent? Now, of course, Freud was not a, you know, we all know today Freud is pretty much, you know, debunked. He's not a scientist, but he had a good sense, I think, for storytelling. And he says, you know, this story works because this kind of represents when we think we're trying to like avoid something, and he talks about mostly our mortality. Like we think we can build some technology to not be mortal. You know, we take photos of things to never forget them. The actual act of it subconsciously reminds us of the fact that we can't win. You know, we're all going to die, and it's going to be ugly. And this is what the story tells us. The story tells us, you know, you can fight as much as you want, but in the end, you are just, you know, you're an organism that will decay like all other organisms. It's very hard to go about your day and answer reviewers' comments about some argument you made when you remember that it's all going to end badly for you. So we repress this feeling, which we have to kind of live our day-to-day life. But sometimes we're reminded of it, and this is for him the story of the uncanny. And I think, you know, when we think about robotic companions, isn't this a little bit like the same idea? We're trying so hard to put all of our AI into this this thing that might outlive us, or that might even, let's think about it a little less extremely. It's this thing that's kind of better than us in some way. Like it'll be with our grandparents when we have to go away for grad school, or it'll be, you know, with our children when we have to go to work. And it can be this thing that we can't be. But then in a way, maybe some of the uncanny is about, you know we're actually leaving our grandparents alone, and we're leaving our children alone. And this is something that contributes to the uncanny. So lesson one from this reading, from these two papers, is that, you know, Freud says these stories of doppelgangers remind us that deep down we know the thing we would like to forget is that we are fragile and mortal. And I will say my corollary of this is, you know, we design robots to do this like social labor in our stead. We're trying these robots to do these things we don't want to do or we can't do. But that very thing reminds us of our own social, of our own shortcomings in the social fabric that we live in. The second paper, which is a paper I love, and I actually almost taught a full class only on this one paper one semester, which is Benjamin's, you know, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. Again, just a short like raise of hand. How many people have read this paper? Okay, so a couple of you. Best paper written in like at least the 20th century, in my opinion. So he talks about a lot of things. One of the things he talks about is this idea of authenticity of the thing itself, of what is the he talks about artwork. So he talks about, let's say, I mean, not in his time, but he will talk about the actual, you know, Eiffel Tower versus a sculpture of the Eiffel Tower. He talks, it's kind of like a precursor to a lot of the postmodern thinking about like what is the thing itself and what is the replication of it. And he has this idea that the whole sphere of authenticity is outside technical, and of course, not only technical reproducibility. You can't reproduce something authentic. He says philosophically it's a contradiction, you know. The reproduction is by its definition unauthentic. And he goes into a lot of detail about examples and what this means. And I really recommend you to read this because it's if you've ever tried to take a photo of a sunset, you know the disappointing feeling that you felt, because that sunset was amazing and the photo is disappointing. And as if I always think Benjamin would have had such a great time in the 21st century because he was just like, he was writing for us. He says the desire of the contemporary masses, i.e. like the Instagram crowd, to bring things closer. So you see something, want to bring it closer into your phone, and not just closer, but also share with all your friends, is as ardent as they're bent toward overcoming the uniqueness of every reality by accepting its reproduction. So he says modern people, i.e. 1920s, they seem to have this strange thing where they're willing to accept this replication of the original thing and consider it better than the original. He says, every day the urge grows stronger to get hold of an object at very close range by way of its reproduction. And then, you know, I mean, we're obviously in this era right now where people prefer to watch at their screen, looking at the thing that they're supposed to be excited about, for a video that two people will see and nobody will ever see again. But he says, you know, this will never work. Yeah, good luck, modernity, because this is kind of a hard quote to parse. So I'm just going to try and translate it. He says, the more you're trying to make something permanent by replicating it, the more you're actually making it transient and worthless. So by the actual mechanism of replicating the worthwhile experience, you're rendering it worthless. And again, it's a fascinating chapter in this paper. Highly recommended. Spend a weekend with it. And I would say, sort of summarizing what Benjamin says, he would say authenticity cannot be replicated. Any technological attempt to make an experience permanent will strip it from both its unique meaning and its permanence. It will actually make it more transient. Maybe to sort of paraphrase this, your memory of something that you will just experience and not capture will be more permanent. Like as soon as you captured it, it will not only erase your memory, but also the photograph will like go into oblivion. And so I will say as a corollary that the robots replicating the social relationships in a technological way to make them more reliable, more there 24/7, only create an unauthentic forgery devoid of its social meaning. And I will sort of skip one paper and move to another super important paper in my view, by Sherry Turkle, so moving almost 100 years forward in time. Sherry Turkle in 2007 wrote a brilliant paper called Authenticity in the Age of Digital Companions. I consider Sherry Turkle to this day one of my greatest influencing idols. And in this paper, she goes one step further. So right now, until now, what we've said is, you know, you can try and make a digital replication of social relationships, but good luck, this is going to, you know, come back to haunt you. Sherry Turkle takes it one step further, and she says, not only will the unauthentic be worthless, it'll also render you incapable of appreciating the authentic. So she gives a story of, she has this, the story of a graduate student who confided in her that she would trade in her boyfriend for a sophisticated Japanese robot if the robot would produce caring behavior. I showed my robots to first-year students at Cornell, like 17, 18-year-old students. And one of them came to me after the lecture and says, if you put a robot that listens to your problems in a fraternity, this room would be occupied 24/7. I would much rather talk to a robot than to the people I live with. So this is what this like 18-year-old says, which this 10, 15 years ago, this graduate student told Sherry Turkle. And she has this, this worry that the question is not whether the children will love the robotic pets more than the animal pets, but rather whether it will change what loving actually means. Whether, and I will sort of give you another sort of parallel to this, does having friends on Facebook change what your actual friends meant to you? Does liking something online change what your actual feeling of liking something is? And Sherry Turkle will argue that yes. Going back to the young woman, I'm quoting here, who was ready to turn her boyfriend in for a sophisticated robot, is there a chance that human relationships will just seem too hard? And this is the risk that she brings forth. And now I'll try to bring this back to design. So one of the things that we see in these social robot designs is that they communicate clean designs, right? So designs are smooth, they look like appliances, sometimes they look like high-tech electronics. And the design message here is that this is something that's simple, easy to operate, it's one click, one command away. If social robots promise us clean and smooth interaction advertised through their design, maybe it will make us less accepting of the unclean interaction we have to have with humans who are unfriendly, have their own opinions, they don't like what you like, and you have to be in conflict with them. And kind of based on this, if we take all of these together, and I will share these slides with you, I go back to this article I read about IKEA and craft. And IKEA and craft, they talk about these questions, about this idea that craft objects in design, what they communicate to us from a design perspective is uniqueness, is difficulty, is tradition, is authenticity. You know, you buy something that somebody made, you own the one thing that they made, and you can't really replicate this thing. So when I asked with this design of a robot called Blossom, whether robots can be craft objects, I really tried to bring forth the following points. That if you make a robot into a craft object, you could overcome, and again, this is more like a critique than a proposal for a product, but it kind of tells a different story than mass-produced, appliance-like robots. Every robot is different just by definition because, I sat there for, 20 hours and made this one gray robot that will, no other robot will have exactly the same folds as this one. It has a time and space where it was created, using Benjamin's words here. So the robot is only in one place. If I'm going to ship this robot away from my home, I'm not going to have this robot ever again until I get this robot back. I can't make another robot like it. It's transient, and we didn't talk about transience, so I'll skip this. It communicates that it takes time to make something. It's not just a sphere that exists in the world drawn out of a CAD program and that translates into a 3D printer that then, the machine gave you as a gift. But somebody had to spend time and not do other things to make this robot. And it's imperfect, it's slowly it comes apart. Some of you can see the holes are not even. And maybe it sort of tells us a story about that social companions are not perfect and they're one-offs, and you have to appreciate them for the time that you have them. And at some point they'll just die or wither away. And I think it offers a different perspective on what a social robotic companion can be that could overcome some of these questions of the social uncanny. So I want to leave a couple of minutes more for questions and discussions. I think I'm about like 23 minutes in or something, 24. So thanks a lot for turning your camera on and for participating and listening. And I'm happy to talk to you about this because I'm still writing this paper.
Great. Thank you, Guy, for the fascinating presentation. It's the first time in my life that a roboticist cited Benjamin, and I'm very happy. So we can take a couple of questions from the audience. So please come forward or write in the chat if you have questions for Guy. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Your talk reminded me of the new robot called Labot in Japan. I don't know if you have heard of it. And that is like designed to be really needy, imperfect, and really, really needy. And it wants your attention all the time, and it can't change its own clothes on its own. Do you think that's like a new attempt from HRI to like address some aspect of the uncanniness, and then it's like I feel like it's a different direction in terms of robot design. I feel like people are wanting the messiness of humanity rather than the cleanness in a robot. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I love this robot. Honestly, I'm following its Twitter feed where I can't read Japanese. I don't know what's written there, but I keep seeing this. Yeah, there's something really about this robot that has this handcrafted aspect to it, and this it has, if people haven't seen it, it has like a huge LiDAR stuck on the top of its head. So it's like
Yeah.
cute like animal, and then it has like a big thing like somebody implanted a LiDAR on top of its head. And it kind of also tells us, kind of exposes the sensors in a way that's not, they're not trying to hide it behind some like, you know, clever sheet of glass or something. So I think that's a really interesting design choice. I mean, I think the overarching question is again, like what kind of use cases and what stories do we tell about these robots? You know, this like whole part of the family story, and this is a creature that needs you, I think is, we need to really think deeply about what the meaning of that is. But in terms of design, it's definitely a design I really appreciate.
I've been monitoring the Twitter feed. Sorry, I'm talking too much, but like people share like the same lingo, and customers call it like they say I gave a birth to their own level when they come to their home from the company. Like, so I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, so it's like by both ways.
Thank you.
Great. There's two people have raised their hands, so I will give the floor to Jared, and then there's also a question reflection in the chat. So Jared, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Really happy that we ended up with a proposal for a possible solution, the handcraftedness. But I noticed that when you talked about handcraftedness, you showed examples of the exterior of the robot being handcrafted. And that made me wonder, for me, robots are more about their behavior than about their exterior. And how do you think we could apply handcraftedness to a robot's behavior?
So this is actually the kind of the second half of the PhD thesis of Michael Sugiton, who was working on the Blossom robot. And the interior itself is also, it's not handcrafted, but it's kind of like you can assemble it yourself, and it's made from household items. And in terms of the movements, he's been working for the last 3 years on different ways of capturing movements from people and recording them and storing them, and so that people can like make their own behaviors. I think it's hard. It kind of goes into the whole literature of you know, learning from demonstration, programming paradigms that are more accessible, like Scratch, and that's a whole world that I'm really not an expert in. But Michael has been looking a lot more into capturing movements from people using just puppeteering, and then trying to extract things from them with you know, deep learning techniques, and using those to generate new behaviors. So again, it's very humble beginnings, but he's asking that question in his dissertation and suggests some ideas. But it's a great, I think there's still a lot more to do in that idea, in that direction. Thanks.
All right. I will take another question from Ellie that also raised her hand, and then maybe we can keep up the discussion later on.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting, and I really liked the idea of Sherry Turkle's paper on how like inauthentic interaction can actually even take away from the authentic interaction. And I kind of want to ask a philosophical question there. Well, how do you think that compares to the overall picture of you know, just advances in technology, not just robots, but anything else that in a way makes your life easier, can we really say that that is taking away from the interaction itself? For example, does, you know, searching something on Google take away from looking it up, you know, in an actual library? Or is like wanting that easier interaction, say with a robot that is less nuanced, less complicated, really wrong if you prefer that to having a very confusing interaction with a human?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of like a conservative with these things. You know, I definitely, when I drive somewhere, I write down the directions on a post-it and put it on my car. And if I miss my turn, I have to go back and find it again. And I think I wrote an online post about exactly this. I think we have to curate our digital experiences in a thoughtful way. I'm not somebody who says you have to cancel everything you do and you have to give back technology. But I think in the last, I think 2 or 3 years, we see exactly this kind of societal pushback, where whoever has been, you know, setting the conversation about what technology should give us is a very narrow segment of society. And I think a much larger part of society, including like artists and designers, need to redefine like what do we want to embrace in our lives and what we don't, you know. And I think you can't stop technology from being invented or being, you know, useful, but you can for yourself decide, you know, you can for yourself decide what your life will look like in terms of how you use technology. And I think that's something that a lot more people are being aware of right now. You know, theoretically, you can just take, you know, you can just, reminds me a little bit of this, like there was this nutrition shake that somebody invented in Silicon Valley, where it's like the perfect nutrition you need in this like one shake with no taste. And you could just eat that your whole life and it will be more efficient than going to a restaurant. But I'm not sure that this is what you want for the rest of your life. So it's the same with Google Maps, I think. And I feel like it's I mean, it's sad. I think, you know, being lost in a city is not a bad thing. It doesn't happen to anyone anymore. I mean, the older people in the audience are like, yeah, I remember when I was lost in Helsinki and this happened and I ran into this place, and you tell this to students today and they're like I think like it's really sad that somebody in their 20s does not experience this today, which was a formative experience. But I'm just getting old, so you can disregard anything I say.